What if one moment of courage could change everything you thought you knew about mercy? Rosa Delgado's hands trembled as she carried the coffee pot toward the corner booth where Vincent Moretti sat alone, reading his newspaper like any other Tuesday morning. She'd worked at Gino's Diner for 11 years, serving eggs and hash browns to dock workers, truckers, and the occasional well-dressed man who everyone knew but nobody talked about. Vincent was one of those men. She'd seen the respect in people's eyes, heard the whispered warnings from other waitresses. But that morning, when she glanced at table 7 and recognized the face from the photograph her late husband had once shown her, a face connected to old debts and older violence, her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. When you see danger coming, you don't turn away from those in its path. So Rosa did something that would unravel both their worlds. Where are you watching from today? Rosa had learned to read people during her years at Gino's. The way a customer held their coffee cup could tell you if they'd slept well. The pause before ordering meant money troubles. The averted eyes meant shame about something. Vincent Moretti came in every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 in the morning, ordered 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, black coffee. He always sat in the same booth, always left a $20 bill for a $12 meal, and always said thank you in a voice that was surprisingly gentle for a man with his reputation. She'd been raised in the Bronx by her grandmother after her mother died young. Her abuela had taught her that every person carried their own weight, and judging them wasn't her job. God sees everything, mija, she'd say. You just serve the food and be kind. Rosa had married Tony Delgado when she was 22, a good man who worked construction and dreamed of opening a small hardware store. They'd had 15 beautiful years before the cancer took him, leaving her with memories and medical bills that still kept her working double shifts at 63. Vincent never caused trouble. He didn't demand anything, didn't snap his fingers at the staff like some customers did. He read his paper, ate his breakfast, and sometimes he'd ask Rosa about her day in a way that felt genuine. "How's that grandson of yours doing?" he'd asked last week, remembering she'd mentioned little Marco's baseball game. It had surprised her, this small kindness from a man whose name people spoke in hushed tones. But this particular Tuesday, everything felt different. Rosa had noticed the man at table 7 as soon as he walked in. Late 50s, expensive suit that didn't quite fit right, and eyes that kept darting toward Vincent's booth. She recognized him from a photograph Tony had shown her years ago, back when her husband had gotten mixed up in something he shouldn't have. "That's Sal Marchetti," Tony had whispered, his face pale. "He's the kind of man who doesn't forget and doesn't forgive." Tony had worked off his debt, stayed clean after that, but Rosa never forgot that face. Now Sal Marchetti sat at table 7 with a newspaper he wasn't reading, and Rosa saw his hand slip inside his jacket twice in 5 minutes. The morning crowd was thinning out. Just a few truckers by the window, an elderly couple sharing pancakes, and Vincent in his usual spot, unaware that his past had walked through the door. Rosa's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't her business. She'd survived this long by keeping her head down and her mouth shut. Vincent Moretti was a stranger to her, really. Whatever happened between men like him and Sal Marchetti had nothing to do with a 63-year-old waitress trying to make rent. But then she thought of Tony, how his hands had shaken when he told her about the debt, how grateful he'd been when someone had given him a chance to make things right instead of making an example of him. She refilled coffee cups on autopilot, her mind racing. The diner's owner, Gino, had gone to the bank. The cook was in the back with his headphones on. If something happened, it would happen fast, and nobody would have time to stop it. Her feet carried her toward Vincent's booth before her mind fully decided. She set the coffee pot down on his table with a soft clink that made him look up from his newspaper. "More coffee, Rosa?" he asked, already reaching for his cup. She leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "Your enemy is sitting at table 7. The words tumbled out in a rush. The man in the gray suit. "He's been watching you for 10 minutes, and he's got his hand on something under his jacket." Vincent's face didn't change expression. His eyes stayed on hers for one long moment, and she saw something flicker there. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Then, slowly, he folded his newspaper and set it aside. "You sure about this? My husband showed me his picture once. Sal Marchetti. Tony said he was dangerous." Tony Delgado was your husband? Vincent's voice was quiet. She nodded, suddenly aware of how exposed they both were, how this conversation itself might be the thing that got them both killed. Vincent reached into his pocket and Rosa's breath caught, but he only pulled out his phone. He typed something quickly, then set it face down on the table. "Thank you, Rosa," he said, his voice calm. "Go in the back. Tell Carlos to take a smoke break. Don't come out for 15 minutes, no matter what you hear." Rosa's legs felt like water as she walked toward the kitchen, forcing herself not to run, not to look back at table 7. Carlos was flipping eggs on the griddle when she pushed through the swinging door, and the familiar sizzle of bacon usually calmed her nerves. "Not today. Carlos, you need to take your break now," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just started these orders. Now, Carlos, please." Something in her tone made him look up, and whatever he saw in her face was enough. He turned off the burners, wiped his hands on his apron, and headed for the back door without another word. Rosa stood by the kitchen window, the small round one that gave her a view of the dining room, and watched. Vincent hadn't moved. He sat relaxed in his booth, sipping his coffee like he had all the time in the world. But Rosa noticed his body had shifted, angled slightly toward table 7, and his right hand rested casually near the edge of the table. Sal Marchetti was still pretending to read his newspaper, but his leg bounced with nervous energy. The bell over the door chimed. 2 men in dark coats walked in, and Rosa's stomach dropped. But these men didn't look at Sal. They walked straight to Vincent's booth and sat down, one on each side of him, creating a wall between him and the rest of the diner. They ordered coffee from young Jenny, the other morning waitress, their voices casual and friendly. To anyone watching, they were just friends meeting for breakfast. Everything happened in the space of a heartbeat. Sal stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the tile floor. His hand was inside his jacket, but one of Vincent's men was already moving, crossing the diner in 3 long strides. He didn't pull a weapon. He simply placed his hand on Sal's shoulder and leaned in to whisper something. The color drained from Sal's face. Whatever he'd been planning died in his eyes, replaced by something that looked like fear mixed with resignation. Vincent stood up then, leaving money on the table for his unfinished breakfast. He walked over to table 7 with the calm of a man taking a Sunday stroll. Rosa couldn't hear what was said, but she watched Vincent's mouth move, watched Sal's head drop, watched the whole thing end, not with gunshots and screaming, but with Sal being escorted quietly out the front door. The elderly couple kept eating their pancakes, oblivious. The truckers never looked up from their phones. And Rosa stood in the kitchen doorway, her heart still pounding, wondering if she'd just saved a man's life, or simply delayed something inevitable. Vincent returned to his booth and finished his coffee. 10 minutes later, when Rosa finally found the courage to walk back out to the dining room, he was putting on his coat. He caught her eye and gestured for her to come over. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. "Thank you for the warning. You didn't have to do that. My grandmother taught me you don't watch bad things happen when you can stop them," Rosa said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, "even if it's not your business." Vincent studied her face for a long moment. "Tony Delgado. He worked for my uncle, didn't he? Got in over his head about 15 years ago?" Rosa nodded, her throat tight. "He paid what he owed. He was a good man." "He was," Vincent agreed. "My uncle told me Tony worked double shifts for 6 months to square things up. Never complained, never tried to run. That took character." He paused, pulling a business card from his wallet. "If you ever need anything at all, you call that number." "I pay my debts, Rosa. You gave me something precious today. Fair warning that most people wouldn't have risked giving." She took the card, not sure what else to do. Vincent left his usual 20 on the table and walked out into the bright morning sunshine, his men following like shadows. Rosa stood there holding the business card, her hands finally starting to shake now that the danger had passed. That evening, when she got home to her small apartment in Queens, there was an envelope taped to her door. Inside was $5,000 in clean bills and a handwritten note. For the medical bills. "Consider us even. VM." Rosa sat on her worn couch and cried for the first time since Tony's funeral. She cried for the kindness she hadn't expected, for the fear that had gripped her in that diner, for the strange mercy that lived in the heart of a man everyone called dangerous. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. But 3 days later, when she came home from her shift, she found her apartment door slightly ajar. Her hands went cold. She pushed it open slowly, her mind racing through possibilities, and found Vincent Moretti sitting at her small kitchen table, looking uncomfortable in the modest space. "I'm sorry for letting myself in," he said. "We need to talk. Sal Marchetti was released this afternoon, and he knows it was you who warned me." Rosa's world tilted. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, her purse slipping from her shoulder to the floor. "What do you mean he knows?" Vincent stood up, and in her small kitchen he seemed even larger, his presence filling the space with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "One of his people saw you talking to me. Put the pieces together." His jaw tightened. "This is my fault. I should have gotten you out of there immediately. I wasn't thinking. I don't understand." Rosa moved to the kitchen table and sat down heavily in the chair Vincent had just vacated. "What does this mean?" "It means you're in danger. Sal's the kind of man who deals in revenge. He can't touch me directly anymore. He knows he doesn't have the backing. But you're vulnerable. A way to get to me indirectly." Vincent paced her small kitchen, 3 steps each direction. "I have a place in upstate New York. A house on 10 acres, very private, very safe. I can have you there by tonight. Run away?" Rosa's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. My grandson is 10 minutes from here. My job, my friends, my whole life is here. Your life won't mean much if Sal gets to you." They stared at each other across the worn linoleum floor. Rosa thought of her grandmother, who'd raised her in these same streets, who'd taught her to stand firm when life pushed back. She thought of Tony, who'd faced his mistakes head-on instead of running. And she thought of little Marco, who still needed his nonna to come to his baseball games and make him arroz con pollo on Sundays. "There has to be another way," she said quietly. Vincent stopped pacing. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked tired. "I've been in this life a long time, Rosa. I've made choices I'm not proud of, but I've always tried to live by certain rules. You don't hurt innocents. You don't target families. You take care of people who take care of you." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You saved my life. That matters. That means something. So what do we do? I need to talk to some people. Make it clear that you're under protection. But that takes time, and Sal's impatient. Meanwhile, you can't be alone. You can't go to work. Can't follow your normal routine." He looked around her apartment, taking in the family photos on the walls. The Afghan her grandmother had crocheted draped over the couch, the small shrine to the Virgin Mary in the corner. "Is there anywhere you can go, family?" Rosa thought of her daughter in California, who'd begged her to move west after Tony died. But that would mean leaving everything. And for how long? Weeks? Months? "My daughter, but..." "Call her. Tonight. Tell her you're coming for a visit. I'll have someone drive you to the airport." Vincent pulled out his phone. "And I'll make sure Sal understands that if anything happens to you, if you so much as stub your toe, he answers to me and everyone I still have ties with. He'll back off if the cost is high enough." "You'd do that? Start a war over a waitress?" The words came out thick with disbelief. Vincent met her eyes, and she saw something in them that reminded her of Tony. That fundamental decency that could exist even in complicated men. "You risked everything to warn me. You didn't have to. You'd never even had a real conversation with me. Didn't owe me anything. But you saw danger coming and you stepped in anyway. That's not something I forget." Rosa felt tears sting her eyes. "I just did what felt right. Most people don't." He stood up. "Pack a bag. One of my men will be here in an hour to take you to JFK. I'll handle Sal. You have my word. Have you ever faced something like this? A moment where doing the right thing put you in danger? Let us know in the comments." 3 hours later, Rosa sat on a plane bound for Los Angeles, watching New York disappear beneath the clouds. In her purse was her daughter's phone number, $5,000 she'd been too afraid to deposit in the bank, and Vincent Moretti's promise that she could come home. She thought about courage and consequences, about how one decision made in a moment of fear could ripple out in ways you never imagined. And she prayed, to her grandmother's God, to Tony's memory, to whatever force governed mercy in this complicated world, that Vincent was right, and the cost would be high enough to keep her safe. California was warm and bright, so different from the gray March of New York that Rosa felt dislocated, like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Her daughter, Maria, met her at the airport with tears and tight hugs and a million questions that Rosa couldn't fully answer. "Ma, what's going on? You sounded scared on the phone." Rosa told her a version of the truth, that there'd been trouble, that someone was looking after it, that she just needed to stay away for a little while. Maria's husband, David, was a high school principal with kind eyes who set up the guest room and didn't press for details Rosa couldn't give. Little Marco was beside himself with joy that his nonna had come to visit. At 10 years old, he still believed the world was mostly good, that grandmothers showed up because they wanted to, not because they were running from danger. Rosa held him close and read him bedtime stories and tried not to think about what was happening 3,000 miles away. Vincent called every other day. The conversations were brief, his voice careful over the phone. "Everything's being handled. Don't worry. Enjoy your family." But Rosa heard the tension beneath his words, the things he wasn't saying. On the 4th day, he said, "There's been a complication. Sal's being stubborn. Give me another week." The week stretched into 2, then 3. Rosa helped Maria with the garden, went to Marco's baseball games, learned to make her grandson's favorite tacos the way her daughter had adapted the family recipes to California tastes. She video called the other waitresses at Gino's, who missed her and complained good-naturedly about covering her shifts. She sent money from Vincent's envelope to pay her rent back home, and she waited. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while she was folding laundry. Vincent's voice was different this time, lighter, relieved. "It's done. Sal's agreed to terms. You're safe." Rosa sat down on the edge of the guest bed, a towel clutched in her hands. "What happened?" "I called in some favors, talked to people who could put pressure where it mattered. Made it clear that coming after you would cost him more than his pride was worth." Vincent paused. "There's something else. I bought Gino's diner." "You what?" "Gino was ready to sell anyway. His health isn't great, and his kids aren't interested in the business. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse, as they say." There was a hint of dry humor in his voice. "When you come back, you'll be working for me. Better pay, better hours, and a guarantee that you're protected. Anyone who knows me knows that business is under my watch." Rosa didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You bought a diner to keep a waitress safe?" "I bought a diner because it's a good investment in a neighborhood I care about. Keeping you safe is just good business practice." His tone softened. "You can come home, Rosa, whenever you're ready." That night, Rosa told Maria everything over tea at the kitchen table. Her daughter's face cycled through shock, fear, anger, and finally a reluctant understanding. "Ma, you could have been killed, but I wasn't. And now I'm protected." Rosa reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "I did what my heart told me was right. And sometimes, mija, the world surprises you. Sometimes the people you're afraid of turn out to have honor. Sometimes mercy comes from unexpected places. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales like this one." 2 days later, Rosa boarded a plane back to New York. As the city appeared beneath her, all concrete and steel in beautiful familiar chaos, she felt something shift in her chest. She'd left as a frightened woman running from danger. She was returning as someone who'd learned that courage could be contagious, that one moment of bravery could inspire another, that the world was more complicated and more full of grace than she'd ever imagined. Vincent met her at the airport himself, which surprised her. He took her bag and walked her to a car that was definitely nicer than any she'd ever ridden in. "Welcome home," he said simply. "Thank you," Rosa said. "For everything." They drove through Queens as the sun set, painting the buildings in gold and shadow. Vincent pulled up in front of her apartment building and walked her to her door. The locks had been changed. Better ones, he explained. The door frame had been reinforced. Small changes that meant safety. Inside, she found her apartment exactly as she'd left it, but cleaner. Someone had dusted, aired things out, even left fresh flowers on the kitchen table. "Tomorrow, come by the diner whenever you're ready," Vincent said from the doorway. "No rush. Take your time settling in. Vincent? Rosa called as he turned to leave. Why did you really do all this? I'm just a waitress who gave you a warning. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something ancient and sad in his eyes. My mother was a waitress, he said quietly. She raised me alone, worked double shifts, never asked anyone for help. When I was 15, a customer harassed her. Another customer, just a regular guy having his lunch, stood up for her. Got himself hurt doing it. My mother never forgot that kindness. He smiled, a real smile that changed his whole face. You reminded me that ordinary people doing brave things is how the world stays decent. I wanted to return the favor, for her memory as much as for you. Then he was gone, and Rosa stood in her apartment, finally home, finally safe, understanding that mercy and honor could exist in the most unexpected hearts. The next morning, Rosa walked to Gino's Diner, or what was now officially Gino's Diner, new management, according to the small addition to the sign out front. Everything looked the same and completely different at once. The same red vinyl booths, the same black and white checkered floor, the same smell of coffee and bacon that had been her second home for 11 years. But there were new tables by the window, fresh paint on the walls, and when she walked into the kitchen, Carlos was working with a brand new grill. Rosa! Carlos pulled her into a hug that smelled like aftershave and grilled onions. Thank God you're back. The new boss said you'd been on vacation, but we were worried. Jenny came running from the dining room, her ponytail bouncing, and wrapped Rosa in an enthusiastic embrace. We missed you so much. And you won't believe the changes. Mr. Moretti gave us all raises and hired another cook so Carlos doesn't have to work doubles anymore. Vincent arrived at 9 o'clock, just like he used to. But this time he came through the kitchen entrance and asked to speak with Rosa in the small office that used to be Gino's. The office had been cleaned out, repainted, and now held a decent desk, a comfortable chair, and a small window overlooking the street. This is yours, Vincent said, gesturing around the space. I'd like you to be the manager. You know this place better than anyone. You know the customers. You know what works. I'll handle the business side, but the day-to-day operation should be run by someone who cares about it. Rosa looked around the small office, her mind reeling. Vincent, I'm 63 years old. I've been a waitress my whole adult life. I don't know how to manage. You know how to read people. You know how to make customers feel welcome. You know the difference between running a diner and running a business, and that's what matters. He leaned against the doorframe. Besides, you've already proven you can make tough decisions under pressure. That's the hardest part of management. So Rosa became the manager of Gino's Diner. She learned to do the schedules and the ordering, to handle customer complaints and employee squabbles, to balance the books at the end of each week. Vincent was patient with her questions, teaching her the business side of things with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He still came in on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, still ordered 2 eggs over easy and rye toast, but now he stayed longer, going over numbers with her, asking her opinion on potential changes, treating her like a partner rather than an employee. The months passed, spring turning to summer, turning to fall. Rosa's apartment stayed safe. Sal Marchetti moved to Florida. Some said voluntarily, some said encouraged, and the threat that had driven her to California faded into memory. The diner thrived under Rosa's management. She hired Rosa's cousin's daughter who needed a job, gave a second chance to a young man just out of rehab who reminded her of Tony, created a place where people felt welcome and cared for. One November morning, almost a year after that fateful Tuesday when Rosa had whispered her warning, Vincent came in carrying a folder. He set it on the table in front of Rosa with a serious expression. I need you to sign these papers. Rosa's heart jumped, fearing something had changed, that the safety she'd built was about to crumble. She opened the folder and stared at the documents, not understanding at first. Then the words focused. Transfer of ownership, shares, partnership agreement. You're making me part owner? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. 50-50. You've earned it. This place wouldn't be what it is without you. Vincent sat down across from her. Besides, I'm getting old, Rosa. I've been thinking about legacy lately. What we leave behind when we're gone. My mother would have liked knowing I used what I have to help someone who deserved a chance. Rosa signed the papers with shaking hands, tears blurring the ink. She thought of her grandmother, who'd taught her that kindness was never wasted. She thought of Tony, who'd proven that mistakes didn't have to define you. She thought of that moment in the diner when she'd made a choice based purely on what felt right, not knowing it would change the entire trajectory of her life. That evening, Rosa called Maria in California and told her everything, the whole truth this time. Her daughter listened, and when Rosa finished, Maria said simply, "I'm proud of you, Ma. Abuela would be too." Vincent stopped coming in quite as regularly after that. His health wasn't what it used to be, and he was stepping back from most of his business interests. But once a month, he'd show up on a Tuesday morning, order his eggs over easy, and sit in his old booth reading the paper. Rosa would pour his coffee and sit with him for a few minutes. Two people who'd found an unexpected friendship born from one moment of courage. The diner became a place where second chances were given, and mercy was understood. Where a former gang member could get hired on probation and prove himself worthy of trust. Where a single mother could work flexible hours and bring her daughter to sit in a booth doing homework. Where the neighborhood came together over coffee and eggs, and the quiet assurance that someone cared. Rosa lived to see her grandson graduate high school, then college. She watched the diner become a landmark, a place people pointed out with stories. "That's where Rosa works. Did you hear about what she did?" The details changed in the retelling, growing more dramatic, but the heart of the story remained true. That one woman had chosen courage over fear, and a dangerous man had chosen honor over revenge, and something beautiful had grown from that choice. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to leave a comment with your thoughts about mercy and second chances, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the goodness that can exist in unexpected places. Thank you for joining Rosa's journey. May you find the courage to do what's right when it matters most, and may you encounter grace when you need it least expected.